Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. My name is Amy Irfat, and I am a private sector specialist with IFC's employability program, Vitae, and I will be moderating this session. Today, we have a timely topic for you: how to ensure that your students are digitally literate. We live in a digital world that is becoming ever more digital. So how do education institutions help their students prepare for this world? What policies can they put in place to help with that? How can they keep up with the ever-changing technology and content? These are some of the questions that we will be exploring today and discussing practical solutions from around the globe that you can start taking action with inside your institution. We have a great panel of speakers representing different parts of the globe. I am delighted to introduce them. We have David Porter, the previous CEO of eCampus Ontario, leading initiatives across Ontario's 45 universities and colleges to innovate in the technology-enabled learning space. And also, he's the Senior Advisor for Higher Education at the Commonwealth of Learning. Welcome, David. We have Michael Fung, the Executive Director of the Institute for the Future of Education at Tecnologico de Monterrey, a leading private university in Latin America. Previously, he was responsible for developing the continuing education and training landscape in Singapore via the Skills Future organization under the Ministry of Education. And last but not least, we have our own Alejandro Caballero, the Principal Education Specialist at IFC, the World Bank Group. His experience in education spans across Asia, the Middle East, North Africa, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and focuses on technology in education, online education, and employability. I'm sure you are going to have questions for our speakers, so we have a Q&A session at the end. I would like to encourage you all to send in your questions throughout the session in the Q&A box, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. Now, before we move to our speakers, I have a poll question for you. If you could kindly pull that up, Ross, that would be great. Now, the question is, does your institution provide digital literacy training to all students, including how to communicate effectively online, how to find and evaluate information online, and how to use the internet safely to create and share digital content? You can, if you could select your answer, and we'll announce the results once you do. So it could be yes, it's offered to all students, or it's offered in certain programs only, or no, but we do offer computer skills training, basic or discipline specific software, and that's offered to all students, or none of the above. So I'll give you couple of sessions once the answers come in. Please let's show them on the screen, Ross. Thank you. So 44% of you are saying it's offered to all students, and 28% that it's only offered on some programs. 23% no, but you do offer computer skills, and 5% that you show none of the above. Okay, that's interesting. We have a different pool then here, because actually our data, when we did this globally through our assessments and benchmarking exercises that we conduct at Vitae, only 19% of universities and colleges were offering digital skills and digital literacy to all students. But this is the right place to be to learn more about this. Now let's move to our speakers, and I'd like to start with you, Alejandro. Before we delve into digital literacy and how to equip our students with this, could you tell us, first of all, why you think this is so important? Why all the hype?
No, thanks, Amy, and thanks so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to share a panel with David and Michael here. Digital literacy has become paramount in today's life because the world is going digital. It's not only about being an effective student and acquiring skills to do better learning. It's really the need to become an effective citizen that's fully integrated in today's societies. We're seeing that government services are going digital, are going online. Many people struggle with this transition, in particular elderly people in our societies that maybe are not so familiar with digital tools. So we need to really embrace digital skills as a key part of our lives. And I think the pandemic has only accelerated that trend that started much earlier and that was already happening even in the pre-pandemic days. So today, digital skills is equal to effective citizenship, and there's a huge need for students to acquire this from a very early age. Whether we start with the basic skills, which are the ones that are needed for effectively function in society, intermediate skills, which are the ones to be needed to be effective workers, or even advanced skills for those that would decide to occupy themselves in IT professions. But across this range of different levels of digital skills, the need is to really accelerate acquisition and to be fully digitally literate to effectively function in today's world.
Yeah, basically, we can't live without them. I couldn't agree more. So, David, could you tell us how you define digital literacy? Because we use the terms digital literacy and digital skills interchangeably, but would you consider them to be the same?
No, I think it's a continuum of practice, Amy, and I think Alejandro's point about learning to use the tools as part of digital citizenship, it's really an apprenticeship, starting with the functional access that you might have. And this diagram from Beatham and Sharp from 2010 talks about a pyramid of digital literacy, which really for me is a transition from knowing about the tools, knowing how to use them functionally, to having them become part of your practice as a professional or as a learner or as a citizen. And it's really about identity development as you move forward. And it's a progression of skills that are required. I think what's really important is that digital literacy is not simply knowledge of what tools are available, but how to use them effectively, proactively, and positively to better oneself or one's community or be part of your employment situation. And it takes intentionality to actually build a digital fluency program. And that means training for learners, training for educators, and also structures and policies in an academic or a college environment to ensure that this happens.
Right. And could you give some examples of that when you say knowing about the tools is different than being able to master them? Like a couple of examples to hone that in.
Yeah, I think it's really understanding how to search for information effectively and then vet and verify that information is from a credible source, is not just someone's opinion, but it actually comes from research or it comes from actual fact. It's not something that has been simply dreamt up and conflated as knowledge that others should use and promote. So I think just understanding the whole cycle of how content is created, how it is verified, how it is vetted, and how it is effectively communicated, attributed, and cited is a really important skill to learn, especially for high school students and beginning university students, to make sure that their academic experience has integrity as a part of it, associated with their knowledge of digital literacy and their acquisition of digital skills.
Right, yes. Being able, I think this is a key one, being able to differentiate between somebody's opinion and real facts. I think if everybody in the world could do that, we would have a very different world. Could you now, on that one and digital literacy in general, could you tell us what kinds of policies and procedures an education institution can put in place to ensure that their students attain this?
Yeah, I think it's having an actual program of practice for students. So that means training faculty and instructors to actually work with students to develop the skills. And for that to happen, I've worked with communities in Canada and in East Africa to work with instructors proactively to acquire skills so that they understand how to use tools effectively for teaching, digital tools, how to be a collaborator with peers and professionals, how to do experiments effectively in your classroom using the tools to demonstrate their effectiveness, but also their downsides, how to actually curate resources and information and make them available to others, things like Creative Commons licensing and other kinds of practices that ensure that we have good information, that it is verified and correct, and that it is useful to others in their pursuit of further learning or even workplace skills. We need to be clear about these kinds of intents. We built a program called Extend in Ontario, which is extremely popular with digital badging and competency development for instructors. We've used it in East Africa, in universities in Kenya. But there's also a need for things like codes of conduct and practices that are required in the university or college setting to ensure that people are using the tools effectively, being academically, having academic integrity in the work they do, and being clear on policies with respect to how they communicate with others respectfully and positively.
Right, and it sounds the way you're saying it makes it sound simple to some extent. So the next question I wanted to ask is, do you think universities that don't have this in place can go ahead with this alone, or do you think that can be difficult? Like, are there codes of, is there something online?
Well, I think there are lots of free materials available in the digital literacy space that allow institutions to understand how to wrap digital skills into their assessment practices in their work with students, so that students are not simply taking tests all the time, but they are proactively doing project-based activities that allow them to exercise the skills that they've acquired digitally at a deep level and understand how to apply those skills effectively in place. I've always been a proponent of teachers teaching teachers, and I think that in communities of educators, we need to build communities of practice and collaboration environments where people can acquire skills, get access to content and resources that's freely available. And that's where things like a Creative Commons licensing regime works very well to share things effectively without being mired in any kind of copyright issues. So these kinds of ideas are part of teacher training programs that I've been a part of, and not only just telling people about it, but actually giving them the opportunity to exercise that new knowledge and skill effectively with their colleagues and peers, and by subsequent use with their students.
Thank you for that, David. That was really helpful. Michael, I'd like to move to you to hear about the experience in Singapore. What were the challenges the universities in Singapore faced when transforming to ensure the provision of digital literacy and skills? And how did you overcome these challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. As David had helpfully pointed out, there are different levels of digital fluency, digital skills. And in the Singapore context, we had defined it at 4 different levels. We call it foundational, basic, intermediate, and advanced. And there are different challenges and different interventions across these different levels of digital skills. Mm-hmm. But I think at the when I think about universities in Singapore and the work that we did with them, the universities will be focused more on the intermediate and advanced skills, especially for the students, but also as they reach out to the wider non-traditional learners like the workforce, some of the offerings go into the basic space as well. I see 3 main challenges for universities. First is just keeping up with the latest technological developments. As we all know, technology is moving so fast, and part of the challenge is making sure that curriculum stays up to date with the changes that's happening out in the industry. So having some kind of flexible, agile approach towards curriculum design and update is going to be very important within the universities. This also means that universities have to have regular and close engagement with employers so that they're able to sense what's the demands, what are the changes in the skills that are needed. And to be honest, a lot of the leading edge skills in digital space is coming out from the industry. So for example, in the area of artificial intelligence, the Googles and the Microsofts are creating new knowledge as we speak each day. And so having close contact with them, but also analyzing what employees are looking for in job boards, that's very helpful in figuring out what some of the latest skills are needed. So that's challenge number 1, keeping up with the technological developments. The second one, which I think, second challenge, which I think David had already talked about, is upskilling of faculty, teacher training, faculty training. How do we ensure that they have the latest knowledge, but also in terms of improving pedagogical methods so that we're able to take learners through a process to build skills and be work ready as they come out to the workplace. One of the things that we are hearing a lot from employers is students are coming out to the workplace, but may not have the exact skills they need to do a job that requires digital proficiency. And so building these work-ready skills through experiential learning, through challenge-based learning is important, and that's the second big challenge. I think also as we reach out to more non-traditional learners, faculty and teachers would have to find new ways of delivering learning to these non-traditional students. And the way they learn is going to be quite different from young students that are coming in to higher education for the first time. And I think for faculty, greater levels of engagement, how do they talk to industry? How do they engage with them? That's a capability that has to be built out as well. The third challenge, I think, is the university's own internal digital transformation. And that's not easy. All of us who have worked in organizations that have embarked on a journey knows, we all know how difficult it is, and we have to walk the talk. And that requires redesigning academic processes, administrative processes, and taking care of things like cybersecurity. And that major transformation requires leadership commitment to that transformation. I don't think it's an option anymore. We can't just dip our toes and try a few pilot projects. We have to commit to transforming the entire organization to be digital. And so these are the 3 big challenges and some of the areas that we need to address when I think about universities moving in this direction.
Right. Okay. So yeah, keeping up with the latest technology and making sure your curricula is up to date, faculty training, and then your own transformation. And going to the first point you made on curriculum being agile and being able to change it. I have a question there that I think the audience is going to be interested in is, could you elaborate a bit on how to do this within existing regulatory frameworks in a country? As many of our clients struggle with making changes to curricula within the current regulatory frameworks, in their countries that do not support change all the time. Maybe you could give some examples how to work outside that, whether it's from Singapore or maybe Mexico, where you also work now.
Yeah, thanks. That's an excellent question. The question is not what, but how. And that's always the important one. You touched on a really important point. Educational systems across our countries, and many countries, or maybe should I say all countries, tend to be tightly regulated for good reason, because we are delivering public good to a great segment, a large segment of the population. So there are many regulations, well-intentioned regulations that have been put in place over the years. These regulations sometimes get in the way of change, especially if we are unbundling the curriculum and trying to offer learning in more modular, bite-sized fashion. David talked about digital badges, modular learning, micro-credentials, and so on. That's a challenge because the existing system runs up against regulations. So I think for programs that lead to specific qualifications, I think the tendency is that these programs require approvals, regulatory approvals, if you're making changes to it. It also has an impact on funding parameters. If you are enrolling students in short programs, the funding formula could be zero or could be different from regular students. So these are indeed the regulatory considerations as we think about offering new programs and restructuring curriculum. So I think from an institutional perspective, or even from a system perspective, we have to look at how we work with and around these regulations. Typically, in the areas of courses that are for credit, there is regulatory, there are regulations, but there are also academic policies that govern these courses. So one way that I've seen that has been very effective in getting quick wins and working around these restrictions is to offer additional options on top of your regular offerings. As we are trying to revamp our curriculum, think about quick wins of introducing, say, boot camps or short courses in the form of MOOCs. And this can be very targeted to meet specific industry needs. We've done that in Singapore, and we're also doing that in Mexico. So, for example, my institute offers boot camps in cybersecurity, in data analytics. In Singapore, we partnered with a company called Generation to offer digital marketing, to offer engineering expertise in a bootcamp format. And this sat outside of regular curriculum offering. And institutions can choose to recognize some of these as part of the curriculum offerings, or to give exemptions or credits for some of these learning that's already happened. The other big area of opportunity, I think, is certificate non-credit programs. And these are targeted at very industry demanded skills. So the National University of Singapore in Singapore and the Singapore Management University had established substantial operations in continuing education through the continuing education and adult learning outfits to offer non-credit programs to meet different industry needs in the digital skills areas. And also in the Mexican context, we're offering a range of lifelong learning courses at Tec de Monterrey. Last year alone, we trained more than 100,000 people, and this gives us flexibility in the types of offerings that we design and deliver to different learners. But I do think that in the mid to the longer term, there is a need to review regulatory barriers to enable micro-credentials so that we can modularize our courses, to look at funding rules to allow for bite-sized learning and stackable learning over time. In some jurisdictions, there's also work on mapping micro-credentials to qualification frameworks and aligning and harmonizing across different programs. And these are things that I've seen happening in Singapore and in Hong Kong as well.
Right. Okay. So basically, doing something on the side until the regulation can actually catch up and allow institutions to use micro-credentials or just update their curricula just faster within the regulation. I think that's a very helpful tip, and I will come back to that, and I'd like to ask, come to Alejandro on it. But before we dig into that, Alejandro, I'd like to ask you about technology. I mean, we've been talking about digital skills and literacy, and we haven't brought up the topic of investing in technology, which can be quite expensive. So what are your thoughts on whether investment in technology is a necessity? And if yes, what strategies can universities and colleges follow to help them fund this?
No, thanks, Amy. And obviously, this goes beyond the topic of digital skills into the broader topic that I think Michael was alluding to in his early remarks about digital transformation of higher education institutions. I mean, I must say that, first of all, technology is an enabler. It's not an end in itself. So the first question should never be how much do I spend in technology. It's really about what's my strategy, what are my goals as an institution, and how can I achieve those goals through different means, including the use of technology. But there's also a reality these days. I mean, the pandemic has really changed the rules of the game. There's a significant need to accelerate digital transformation. This is not something new for higher education institutions, but it's become much more evident during the pandemic. Technology was critical in ensuring business continuity of institutions, and many institutions are redefining their strategic priorities, potentially fewer investments in physical infrastructure, new buildings, new campuses, and moving a lot of the investments towards the technology space. What we're seeing globally is that leaders in virtual education, just to name a few, and some of the leading entities in the US are investing up to 10% or even above 10% of their annual budgets in technology. And again, technology defined in a relatively broad sense. In emerging markets where IFC works, higher education institutions that are leading, and we have some benchmarks from, for instance, from Brazil, where there's been significant growth of distance learning players. Just to give a quick example, up to 70% of some of the new intakes into higher education at the peak of the pandemic were coming through through distance learning vis-a-vis traditional face-to-face. So, I mean, just to give an example, some of these higher education institutions have about 7 to 8% of their budgets being invested in technology. And again, many of the institutions we work with are typically at the 3 to 4% level. So again, the world has changed dramatically. I think there's a significant need to invest more in technology. But again, we shouldn't be starting with money, with investments. I mean, it's all about the strategy of the institution, making sure there's a well-defined ambition, objectives, and key results that the institution would like to achieve. And then, you need to prioritize those strategic areas, and eventually the technology solution comes in. But there's a need to get to new technology solutions and to rethink a little bit the mix of investments that universities are making. We're seeing that in our daily conversations with higher education institutions around the world. And there's definitely, an ambition to really use technology in a very strategic ways that are very aligned with the institutional mission of universities. And this will become more of a trend going forward.
Right. No, that's really helpful. Yeah, you start with the strategy, what you're trying to do, and then you come in with technology. It's a necessity, but let's think about what we're trying to do with it. But I had another question on again, investing in technology. What is your verdict on open source technology? Can they be used? Do you believe in their benefits, or what are your thoughts?
No, thanks for the question, Amy. And let me maybe address one final point on the previous question, which is the human side of digital transformation, which I think it's critical. I mean, many institutions struggle with the change management process, with really developing the right culture for transformation, the right organizational structures. the right teams being put in place to address this. I mean, we're seeing that many institutions are, for instance, creating intermediate structures, digital transformation areas within the institution that try to broker a little bit the discussion between academics and operational teams, and also the traditional IT teams, and really try to play a little bit that brokering role to really help advance the strategies around digital transformation. That human side is critical. I mean, it's, as I said, not only about technology in itself, but really about embracing a more holistic approach that takes the human dimension into account. On open source, I think we need to be very open to different types of technology. Open source can be a solution for many higher education institutions. We still see among the institutions IFC works with many universities that operate in Moodle-based environments where Moodle is the LMS, and some of them have made a deliberate decision to stick to Moodle even throughout the pandemic and as they look into the future. But in some cases, there's maybe a space for upgrading digital architecture and IT architecture for a university. I mean, there could be a transition towards state-of-the-art systems in some cases when there's a need for larger scalability and obviously growing in ways that maybe were not foreseen earlier. I think technology has to be very adapted to the local conditions of the different universities, higher education institutions. We need to be open to exploring different solutions, but we also need to be open for change and to really, acknowledge that the world has changed, that there might be new solutions that are needed in the new world. I mean, just to give an example, through D4TEP, IFC's digital transformation program, I mean, we see that many universities are, for instance, upgrading their commercial processes and incorporating CRMs, customer relationship management tools, and integrating them with social networks, WhatsApp Business, Facebook Business, linking that to call center operations, and so on and so forth. Some other universities have decided to really do a significant upgrade to their academic backbone, SIS, and bring some state-of-the-art packages to serve the needs of the institution, in particular when there's growth and scaling up happening, and so on and so forth. I mean, on the administrative side, again, many institutions are also upgrading their ERP capabilities in the current context. I think we need to be open, and going back to the earlier point, really start with what the strategy of the institution is, and only once that has been defined, we can look into specific technology solutions, whether it's open source or more state-of-the-art type of platforms.
Right. And you've kind of almost like jumped into my next question, or you've answered a little bit of it. When you talk about human capital and the need to embrace it and transforming your human capital, what are, in your mind, the main challenges that higher education institutions face? I'm going to the question I asked Michael, when they go through this digital transformation, and what models exist out there that can help them deal with this? Because it's pretty intense to transform your whole institution.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, Amy. I mean, first of all, digital transformation needs to combine three different elements, no? We need to digitally transform academics at the institutional level. I mean, discussions around modalities of education, what's the right mix of face-to-face, even though many institutions are going into a much more hybrid approach these days, but also looking at new modalities, blended online. Do I do this internally, or do I do this with the help of an external providers? We're seeing that many higher education institutions are exploring potential partnerships with third-party providers like OPMs and so on. But there's other academic needs, or needs that blend academics with financial considerations. For instance, what about student success? What about dropout prevention? Can we use technology really address these through predictive models that incorporate data mining techniques and traffic light systems to be able to identify students at risk of dropping out early on. That's another pain point for many universities, in particular those serving low-income students, that needs to be addressed and can be addressed with the help of technology. And then peer-to-peer collaboration tools. More and more the world is going in the direction of collaboration, as Michael alluded, and Tech Monterrey is a great example of that, solving challenges in collaboration with the private sector, being able to work collaboratively through project-based work. And I think David made a few references to that in his early remarks. I mean, this peer-to-peer collaboration can become also a pain point if not done correctly, and addressing that through digital tools becomes quite important. But then there's the whole focus on the student experience, which is becoming also very, very important. And that experience is a combination of different experiences that really define student satisfaction across the student journey. So focusing on the overall experience and looking at the student as a customer is also another area where there's, in some cases, pain points and need for institutions to do things differently. And then finally, there's the whole aspect of administrative processes, whether it's paying tuition online, the possibility of having one-stop shop solutions to access all the administrative services of the institution, issuing grading certificates, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, I think there's pain points across the whole student journey. There's pain points across the different administrative student experience and academic activities of the student. And it's only through a systematic approach that this can be looked at in a way where different areas of the institution are connected, taking into account that digital transformation is really a cross-cutting theme that requires involvement from all areas of a higher education institution.
Right, thank you for that, Alejandro. So I'm hearing, yeah, the technology can help with many different pain points. You need to decide where your pain points are and where to invest. And then there's the whole question of a different model completely, where you might engage with external providers. And that links up with what Michael was saying earlier about micro-credentials or boot camps. So I'd like to come back to you here, Michael, on that and just dig a bit deeper on that one. If you could tell us a bit about your experience in Singapore and Mexico and how they were different in this respect, because this is something that's new. Our clients that we talk to, and as Alejandro also alluded to, that we are considering this, but it's still a new discussion and there's some, let's say, vagueness around it. So if you could shed some light on how that worked in Mexico and Singapore, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, well, thanks. In speaking with employers and people from the workforce, I think there are two big pain points, to use the term that Alejandro used, pain points. One is that employers are not able to find workers with the right skills that they're looking for, right? And that's happening across multiple industries in the digital skills area. The second pain point is on the part of the workers. They are looking for particular jobs and they're looking for opportunities to learn and acquire digital skills that were the jobs. So we're seeing growing gap between the demand and supply of digital talents in the labor markets. And this is common. When I think about my experience in Singapore and in Mexico, I'm hearing the same feedback, the same comments from employers and from working professionals. In the areas of high demand, would be digital skills in high demand would include areas like data analytics, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and a little bit on the softer side, it would be digital marketing and so on. And these seem to be common to me, whether I'm thinking about Singapore or about Mexico. I think also the other big commonality is the importance, the growing importance of general digital fluency. And just living day-to-day lives, being able to interact with smart applications, being able to interact with governments offering digital government services, right? So that's become more and more important, and that applies in Singapore, it applies in Mexico. I think it applies in many parts of the world. And when I think about differences in the Singapore context, and I think Singapore is quite unique, there is strong coordination by the government across various functions. And so that provides alignment across universities and different government agencies that are responsible for developing digital skills. For example, the Infocom Media Development Authority and Skills Future Singapore, which the organization I worked at previously, they're centralized efforts. And that helps because there is a common set of standards that have been defined around digital skills. And this is captured in the skills frameworks that have been produced in the Singapore context. With the common language of skills frameworks, universities and training organizations align to these standards and create educational and training offerings to deliver these skills. And so that kind of coordination is, I think, quite unique in Singapore, but it allows for that alignment. And the government is also able to put funding to lower the cost of digital skills acquisition by the workforce, but also by the general population. Mm-hmm. Now, when I think about the Mexican context, which I think it's more similar to the situation in many other countries, the level of coordination by the government is different from Singapore, not as tightly aligned as the Singapore example. And what I've seen is innovation happening at either the university level, the university is trying to innovate and offer what is required by the industry and by society, or sometimes it's industry associations, sometimes it's non-governmental organizations, or perhaps a group of companies coming together to provide that kind of coordination. I'm seeing a growth in lifelong learning and short cycle programs in Mexico and across the larger Latin American region, but it has yet to become mainstream because these efforts tend to be smaller in scale and tends to be somewhat patchy, depending on where you are and which organizations are getting together to promote digital skills. And the funding sources are different as well. It tends to come from either individuals paying for it, it could be from private sector because they have a need for digital talents, or from foundations, or perhaps from international organizations. So I think that's as I think about the Singapore and Mexican context, that's the commonalities and differences between the two countries.
Thank you very much for that, Michael. And that's helpful for our audience, given most of our audience, as you said, would be the Mexican economy might be more relevant. And on that one, I'd like to come to you, David, because I know you've also worked in Africa, which is where a lot of our clients are from and our audience. And here, what you hear is the biggest challenge that education institutions face when transforming digitally and providing these skills, and what you see as the way to move forward on that.
Well, thanks, Amy. Yeah, I think this has been spoken to by both our speakers, Michael and Alejandro, and the existing culture and the existing regulatory structure in many of our institutions makes it difficult to move beyond where we are now. It's not always easy to get access to the latest technology. There's not a huge culture of collaboration always, or openness to new ideas. And these are the new core competencies of digital fluency. Like you have to be open to new ideas. You have to work in a dynamic environment where change is going to be a part of the workplace. And that means getting used to it in a way that allows you to interact with others in positive ways and build on technological opportunities that might exist. I think Michael hit it really well earlier on when he said meeting with employers is a good way to find out what is the current high currency occupations and technologies that are in use. And I think that the way to get some of these new competencies, core competencies established in an institution is to have relevant departments meet with employers who hire their students to understand what the gap might be, not only in knowledge, but in technology that is required, and model success in pilot programs. They might have external funding, there might be an NGO involved, IFC might be involved, but it's really about building out some kind of new joint program to model and demonstrate success. And in that context, in addressing scarcity, this is an area where employers could actually be contributors to the process, not simply expecting the public institutions to do all the heavy lifting with respect to bringing workforce to them. We need to think a bit differently here and look at joint programs so that we're not outsourcing the new core competency of the institution to the private sector. We're actually building a collaboration that's effective and that can be built upon and modeled in other domains of practice or skill areas. We need to demonstrate small successes from joint programs that work with business and industry, that bring new technologies, new skills, new levels of fluency to our students and our instructors, and be aware that this is an ongoing process. It doesn't have an end, it continues. So we have to model these processes effectively. And I think the private sector engagement, as Michael pointed out, brings a new reality to the fore within an institution in particular.
Right. That's yeah, that's it. Both that it's coming across very clearly. Engage with industry. This is where your starting point is if you want to find out where the new technology, what it is, and the knowledge gaps there. I think it's time for us to move to Q&A. We have one question here that I'm gonna address to you, David, on how it's from Aragesh Hassan, and it's how can we equip our students with digital literacy and digital fluency in a resource scarce setting?
Yeah, that's a really tough question. I saw that question, and it really calls out for partners, for NGOs, government, and others to model processes that work effectively with small groups. Now, the most predominant technology out there is handheld devices, phones, for example. And in most parts of the world, people have some kind of digitally capable phone. And I think it's possible to begin to align learning through things like radio, television, and those phones, and begin to capitalize on the access to the small device as a response device, but also as a question device and as a way to find new opportunities for learning. But it takes partnership and it takes investment to actually deal with the scarcity issue. It is not an easy one to solve. At Commonwealth of Learning, we tried in open schooling in Southern Africa to build classroom in a box technologies that could go into a classroom and create a local area network that could be used with inexpensive tablets, that could get access to the internet through a single hub, that could begin to build course and development programs locally for people to have access. When you spin that out to a community-based environment with community centers that are equipped to be the information hub within a community, then you start to see the opportunity to scale using a real networked approach. But it takes initial investment, it takes innovation, and it takes ingenuity and risk-taking on the part of the individuals running the program to begin to address the issue. If there is no technology available, then digital literacy and fluency is not on the agenda, clearly.
All right. And when you say initial investment, is that mainly time, right? And research and reaching out?
It's time, it's technology, it's people to coordinate the activity. It can happen in small scale ways, but I think the principle at work here is to demonstrate success in microcosm and then expand that success to other nodes of practice around a country or a community. You have to show that you can do something effectively and successfully to attract further investment. And so it takes an initial tranche of funding to pay for the resources, the infrastructure, the people, and the content to make that happen.
If I could add on to what David's saying, I think it is a very challenging question that Agagesh had raised. Some of the examples I've seen, and this taps on the trends that Alejandro has been talking about. There's a lot of open content available out there. There's free tools, open source tools available out there. But some of the examples I've seen are quite encouraging. So, for example, in the Mexican context, the Carlos Slim Foundation has set up an entire learning platform that's called aprende.org. And they've designed a whole range of self-paced, self-directed learning that leads to a certificate that they would issue. But these are linked to job opportunities. So very specific skills acquisition, including digital skills, for specific job opportunities. But it does require the initial investment, like David said. The foundation decided to put money behind it. But that alone is not sufficient, because having the content delivered at low cost, because it's online and you're able to scale up, that alone is not sufficient. You still have to bring that access to communities. You still need that human intervention. But it does reduce the cost of learning substantially, be able to reach out to resource scarce communities.
Thank you, Michael. Alejandro, I think
Yeah, no, just maybe a quick reference to some of the things we're seeing in Africa, for instance. I mean, first of all, there's a thriving EdTech community also in Africa that is emerging. I mean, there's providers that are going purely online when it comes to higher education. So that's already happening in some of the countries where we work in the region, but obviously issues of connectivity, issues of access to hardware. I mean, all of that is there, and I totally agree that mobile technologies are really helping change a little bit the way we look into things. Some of the models that started 100% online have typically pivoted towards blended models, and we have a couple of examples of cross-border providers that are focusing on the African continent that went a little bit in this direction. So having some, in addition to the online provision, that can happen in an asynchronous way to facilitate the fact that the student might not have access to connectivity at all times, but he or she might have access at some points in time during her day. I mean, that's something that can happen, having that blended element where there's physical centers, or maybe where you provide connectivity that maybe will not be available in other contexts or in other locations, the possibility to have a place where you meet face-to-face, and then have students also work asynchronously at their own pace in a self-directed manner. I mean, that's all things that we're seeing happen, and that maybe mitigate a little bit the difficulty in access to connectivity that some students might experience or face. And then obviously, I mean, there's a lot that can be learned also from the project-based collaborative work that needs to happen together, maybe with purely online experiences, to provide a truly enriching learning experience for the student. And that can be facilitated also whenever there's a little bit of a blended approach. But definitely we're seeing many models emerging in Africa that are, leveraging mobile technologies and enabling students to access different learning resources online. Again, many models also have incorporated hybrid and blended elements.
Thank you, Alejandro. I think Hassan came to the right webinar for this. The three of you have loads of advice there. I can see, David, you shared one resource. That's really helpful. Alejandro and Michael, if you have any resources like to share on the chat, please go ahead. So let me see what we have next. Okay, so how they listen to me. Okay, so we have 500 plus hiring partners. Okay, and they are less interested in technical skills than meta skills like courage, self-awareness, and empathy. And how do you integrate these skills into digital skills training? And maybe again on this one, I'll start with David and ask Michael and Alejandro to pitch in. Because the way I read this is digital literacy is very relevant to this, but I'd like to hear what you think, David.
Yeah, I think that these are what we might used to call soft skills, but actually are power skills in most environments these days. And this is really facilitated through the kinds of team-based collaborative projects that people can begin to become engaged in. I think that we don't often do enough of team or collaborative activities in learning environments. It's becoming more prevalent, but it hasn't been the rule. And that's where the ideas about how you work with other people, how you take risks, how you clearly state your perspective, how you take in information by listening to others and extend it to benefit the group. These are the kinds of skills employers are also looking for, and they're not generated necessarily simply by digital skills happening at an individual level. They really have to be part of a team and collaborative environment. And I've heard both Alejandro and Michael speak to that today already, the notion of extended workplaces and people working from different locations. That's where trust and risk-taking and leadership emerge in digital environments that are project-based and require multiple people to be successful.
Thank you, Michael.
Yes, I think it's a good question. And I think this is coming when you come from an employer's perspective, they really want both. It's not just the digital skills, not just technical skills, but also the soft skills, as as David had mentioned. So the way to do this is to embed both types of training within programs, whether it's at the university level or short programs. We've seen that done successfully in a number of boot camps. Some of the boot camps that we designed in Singapore had intensive mindset and attitude training upfront in the first week, because they found what we found was that that's what gets them through the door and helps them to remain employable, followed by the actual technical skills training. And in the skills frameworks that I discussed earlier, it embeds both the technical skills, the digital skills, and the soft skills that are needed. And in designing learning interventions, we need to address both.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, at the end of the day, there's a spectrum of skills that we need students to acquire. Digital skills can be very important. It's narrowly defined. And we see that many of the boot camps or even providers of alternative credentials that are starting focusing on data science, UX, UI, and cybersecurity, and some of these relatively narrowly defined digital skills are moving into other spaces, maybe using digital tools to help students acquire entrepreneurial skills, leadership skills, even things that relate to leisure, like learn how to cook, learn how to develop art projects. Many of the institutes that were operating fully online and started focusing on traditional digital skills are expanding a little bit beyond into soft skills, life skills, leisure-related skills, because I think the reality of today's world is it requires this combination of very different types of skills, and that's also something that obviously can be enabled digitally. So you can acquire entrepreneurial skills through digital means, or you can acquire skills that relate to leadership through digital means, and in many cases, students from low-income backgrounds are really the most interested, for instance, in entrepreneurial skills. At the end of the day, many of them will start small businesses or will have the possibility to venturing into specific freelancing activities or self-directed activities. So I think that combination of different types of skills that can all of them be enabled through digital means and acquired digitally, I think it's becoming a trend even for those providers that started focusing exclusively on digital skills.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Alejandro. And we actually have a very specific question for you from someone in the audience that you had mentioned earlier about an IFC service, D4TEP, that helps organizations, institutions with their digital transformation. Could you give like a brief on that, like how that would be and how they could get in touch with you guys?
Sure, absolutely, Amy. We have a service to accelerate digital transformation of higher education institutions. There's already 15 institutions globally that have gone through this in Latin America, Asia, and also in Africa. We work across the 3 different dimensions: academics, student experience, and administrative services. So it's a very broad approach towards digital transformation. And I'm happy to have a follow-up discussion with anybody that would like to talk. I'm leaving my details in the chat, my email, and again, happy to talk further about how to go ahead with potential collaboration on this front. It's at this point targeted towards typically universities and also technical vocational institutes at the tertiary level. Historically, we've done this in collaboration with Deloitte Consulting, so it's been a partnership to date.
Thank you for that, Alejandro. And yes, if you could also leave website details, this would be great, because the audience will still have access to this. Okay, we're running out of time. I am going to go very quickly for the very last question I see here. It relates to the assumption that we're all digitally connected, whereas in several parts of Africa, staff and students face huge costs of connectivity. Yes, how can IFC assist institutions in under-resourced countries to modulate the cost of connectivity, cost of data, without which they cannot even complete digital transformation? I believe on that one, I don't know, maybe again, Alejandro, if that might be covered to some degree under DP+Associates, to some degree, and so I'll let you answer that. And then David, if you have any and Michael, any things to share on the chat here, that would be great, because we've run out of time. I think you go ahead for 1 more minute. Alejandro, would that be something that DP+Associates could help with?
Yeah, DP+Associates can look into low-cost ways of acquiring connectivity. There's also partnerships that universities can enter into with telco providers and other type of providers to maybe lower the cost of connectivity, but combining that with the possibility of providing students with a specific connectivity options on campus. And we can definitely look into that through DP+Associates. Happy to have a chat with anybody that would like to discuss.
Thank you so much, Alejandro. And I'm just going to very quickly respond to Charlie here before we wrap up, as we've run out of time. Again, it's on application solutions that can start to measure learners' behavior that would prevent or locate dropout potentials. Again, this I believe this is something that the DP+Associates might be able to look into. So perhaps it would be worth connecting with Alejandro later. And then thank you so much, Michael and David, for sharing all these resources. So I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. I mean, wow, that's been a really, really interesting discussion. We didn't have enough time to go through even half the questions, unfortunately, but we have learned some really good points about what the difference is between the skills and digital literacy, what kind of interventions as an institution you can implement, some good resources to learn about that, and what models exist globally. So I wanted to thank our guest speakers, David, Michael, Alejandro. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience with us. And thank you everyone for joining. I really hope that you have some good ideas to move forward on equipping your students with digital literacy and transforming your whole institution. There is so much to do. If you have any questions about the IFC Vitae program and how we might help your institution on employability outcomes, please do not hesitate to contact us through our Contact Us option on the website, which is right above me here, and is in all the invites that you received. And we will be sending you a recording of this session. Looking forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Thank you everyone so much.
Thank you.
Bye everyone. Bye for now.